Millionaire brings Mistress to his office. Party. Pregnant wife arrives with the board of directors. The air in the grand ballroom, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and ambition, crackled with unspoken rules. At the center of this glittering universe was Damien Westwood, a man who didn't just break the rules, he rewrote them. Tonight he paraded his latest revision, a stunning young intern named Chloe on his arm, a public monument to his own audacity. He believed his pregnant wife, Aris, was safely tucked away, a forgotten chapter in his ascent. But Aris was about to remind him and everyone else that the most brilliant minds are often the most underestimated. She wasn't coming to cry. She was coming to collect. The annual Apex Innovations Gala was less a party and more a coronation. It was a testament to the meteoric rise of its founder and CEO, Damien Westwood. This year, the event was held within the sweeping metallic curves of the Walt Disney Concert Hall in downtown Los Angeles, a venue as bold and unapologetically modern as Damien himself. Hundreds of guests, a curated collection of Silicon Beach titans, venture capitalists, and the city's political elite moved through the space like shimmering fish in a deep-sea aquarium. The light from the towering chandeliers caught on diamond necklaces and the polished faces of Patek Philippe watches. Champagne, a vintage that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent, flowed from fountains, and the air hummed with the low thrum of power. Damien Westwood stood at the epicenter of it all. At 38, he was a deity in a bespoke Tom Ford suit. His charm was his sharpest weapon, a disarming smile that could precede either a multi-million-dollar deal or a soul-crushing termination. He was a man who had everything. A 9-figure net worth, a sprawling mansion in the Hollywood Hills with a view that stretched to the Pacific, and a portfolio of accolades that painted him as a visionary. He also had a wife, Dr. Aris Thorne, a woman whose quiet brilliance was the antithesis of his explosive charisma. Aris was not present. The official story whispered among the senior VPs and their impeccably dressed spouses was that her pregnancy, a difficult one, now in its 8th month, required absolute bed rest. It was a plausible, even sympathetic reason. They pictured her in their palatial home, serene and supportive, a domestic goddess nurturing the Westwood heir. This image was a fiction Damien had carefully cultivated. The truth was, Aris hadn't been invited. Their marriage, once a partnership of intellect and ambition, had curdled into a cold war fought in the silent, cavernous rooms of their shared home. Damien saw her pregnancy not as a joy, but as an anchor. Her body, once a source of desire, had become a vessel, and her sharp mind, which he had once admired, now felt like a threat. He had begun to treat her like a beautiful antique doll, to be kept on a shelf, admired from a distance, but never played with. He had started to believe she was fragile, breakable. He had forgotten she was forged from steel. Aris, a doctor of behavioral economics from Stanford, had long ago traded the fast-paced world of academic research and consulting for a quieter life, a choice she'd made to support Damien's dream. She saw patterns in human behavior that others missed, the subtle tells in a negotiation, the flutter of an eyelid that betrayed a lie. For years she had been Damien's secret weapon, his unseen strategist. But as Apex Innovations had grown, Damien's ego had grown with it, eclipsing his need for her counsel. He no longer saw her as a partner, but as an accessory, and lately a cumbersome one at that. The distance between them had become a chasm, and into that chasm had fallen Chloe Vance. Chloe was 23, an intern in the marketing department, with eyes the color of a summer sky, and ambition that burned with the heat of a supernova. She was a mirror reflecting Damien's own youth, his own hunger. She looked at him with the undiluted adoration he now craved, a worship Aris's knowing gaze could no longer offer. To Damien, Chloe was not just a woman. She was a validation. She was proof that he was still the young, virile disruptor, not a man on the verge of 40, tethered to the mundane reality of impending fatherhood. Tonight was to be Chloe's unofficial debut. Bringing her to the gala was a monumental risk, a flagrant transgression against the unspoken rules of his world. But Damien's success had been built on such risks. He thrived on the adrenaline of the gamble, the thrill of getting away with it. He believed his power was a shield, rendering him immune to consequences. He had convinced himself that Aris, sequestered and pregnant, was powerless to stop him. It was his most critical and soon-to-be his most catastrophic miscalculation. From his vantage point near the sculpted bar, Damien scanned the room, a king surveying his court. He held 2 glasses of champagne. He was waiting for Chloe, who was freshening up. He felt a familiar surge of invincibility. Everyone here depended on him, feared him, or wanted to be him. They were all orbiting his star, and tonight he was going to give them a new constellation to gaze upon. He was about to show them all that the universe bent to his will, and his will alone. Chloe Vance emerged from the powder room, a vision in crimson silk. The dress was a daring choice, a slash of color against the room's more muted tones of black, silver, and navy. It clung to her slender frame, a stark and deliberate contrast to the maternal form of the woman she was replacing. She had the taut, unlined beauty of youth, a beauty that felt both potent and perishable. Her smile as she navigated the throng of powerful figures was a carefully calibrated mix of awe and entitlement. She was playing a role, and she was playing it with everything she had. Damien's eyes locked on her, and his signature smile spread across his face. He met her halfway, handing her a flute of champagne. "There you are," he murmured, his voice a low thrum that was for her alone, yet pitched just loud enough for those nearby to catch. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned me." "Never, Damien," she replied, her voice a breathy whisper. She touched his arm, a gesture of familiarity that sent a ripple of shock through the senior staff members who witnessed it. This was Chloe Vance, the intern, the one who fetched coffee and compiled press clippings, and she was touching the CEO's arm as if she had every right to. Damien savored the silent, wide-eyed reactions. This was the point. He led Chloe on a slow, deliberate tour of the room, a predator showing off his prize catch. He didn't introduce her as his mistress, of course. The lie was more insidious, cloaked in the language of corporate mentorship. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Chloe Vance," he announced to a circle of stunned-looking executives. "Chloe is one of our brightest young talents in the marketing division. A real rising star. I've taken her under my wing. It's crucial we nurture the next generation of innovators at Apex." The executives, men and women, twice Chloe's age with mortgages, children in private school and careers, tethered to Damien's goodwill, simply nodded. They smiled stiff, unnatural smiles. They saw the way Damien's hand rested on the small of Chloe's back, the proprietary gleam in his eye, the blush on her cheeks that was not entirely from the champagne. They understood exactly what kind of nurturing was taking place. They were complicit in their silence, their survival instincts overriding any sense of moral outrage. A few feet away, Eleanor Vance, the sharp-witted and even sharper-tongued head of legal, watched the spectacle with a look of undisguised contempt. She had known Damien for a decade, had drafted the ironclad contracts that built his empire, and had also been a guest at his wedding to Aris. She considered Aris a friend, or as close to a friend as her guarded nature would allow. She caught the eye of Michael Chen, the chief financial officer, a man who looked perpetually worried, and for good reason. Michael's expression was a mixture of horror and frantic calculation. An open scandal of this magnitude could spook investors and shave points off their stock price. "He's lost his mind," Eleanor muttered under her breath, taking a large gulp of her gin martini. "This is beyond reckless," Michael whispered back, adjusting his glasses. "This is corporate suicide. What is he thinking?" "He's not thinking," Eleanor corrected. "He's feeling, and right now he feels untouchable." Damien, oblivious or perhaps simply indifferent to their disapproval, continued his parade. He introduced Chloe to a powerful city councilwoman, a tech blogger with millions of followers, and a visiting venture capitalist from Singapore. With each introduction, he grew bolder, his compliments for Chloe more effusive, his physical proximity to her more intimate. He was high on the sheer audacity of it all. He was writing a new narrative in real time, one where he was the master of his own destiny, unburdened by convention or the wife he had left behind in his sterile, silent mansion. Chloe, for her part, was swept up in the whirlwind. This was a world she had only dreamed of. Men whose names she had only read in Forbes were shaking her hand, listening to her opinions, or at least pretending to. She was standing next to the sun, and its warmth was intoxicating. If there was a price to pay for this moment, she couldn't see it. The glare was too bright. She mistook Damien's recklessness for power, his arrogance for confidence. She believed she was on the verge of having it all. The apex of the evening and the nadir of Damien's judgment came when he clinked a knife against his glass, calling for silence. The low hum of conversation slowly died down as all eyes turned to him. Chloe stood beside him, her hand now linked with his. "Friends, colleagues, partners," Damien began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "Thank you for joining me tonight to celebrate another year of unprecedented success for Apex Innovations. We have shattered records, defied expectations, and solidified our place as leaders in the industry. But success is not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about people. It's about fostering talent and believing in potential." His gaze drifted down to Chloe, a fond, almost paternal smile on his lips that fooled no one. It's about finding those rare individuals who have the fire, the drive, the vision to change the world, and it's about giving them the platform to shine. He raised his glass. "So I want to propose a toast, not just to our past achievements, but to the future, to new ideas, to bold moves, and to the bright, brilliant stars of tomorrow." He squeezed Chloe's hand. "To the future. To the future." The crowd dutifully echoed their voices, a muddled chorus of admiration, envy, and disgust. The toast was a thinly veiled tribute to his own infidelity, a public anointing of his mistress. It was the ultimate act of hubris, a declaration of war against his marriage, delivered in front of his entire professional world. He took a triumphant sip of his champagne, the taste of victory on his tongue. It was in that precise moment of supreme self-satisfaction that the great double doors at the entrance of the ballroom, which had been closed since the start of the festivities, swung silently open. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. It began not with a sound, but with a collective intake of breath, a subtle but palpable change in pressure. The murmur of the party didn't just quiet. It vanished, sucked into a sudden gaping vacuum of silence. Every head in the ballroom, from the junior associates by the door to Damien Westwood himself on the makeshift stage, turned in unison. Framed in the grand doorway, silhouetted against the ambient light of the lobby, was a figure. It took a moment for the crowd's eyes to adjust to process the impossible sight. It was Dr. Aris Thorne. She was not the frail, bedridden woman of Damien's convenient narrative. She was a portrait of regal composure. She wore a bespoke gown of deep emerald velvet, a color that spoke of wealth and authority. The fabric was expertly tailored to accommodate her 8-month pregnancy draping over her belly, not as a sign of vulnerability, but as one of majestic maternal power. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the clean, intelligent lines of her face. Her expression was serene, her eyes calm and clear as they swept across the stunned assembly. She did not look like a woman scorned. She looked like a queen who had arrived to hold court. The shock of her presence alone would have been enough to shatter the evening's gilded facade. But Aris was not alone. To her right stood Marcus Blackwood, the chairman of the board of Apex Innovations. A formidable man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a gaze that could wither a hostile takeover bid at 50 paces, Marcus was the embodiment of old money and corporate gravitas. He was rarely seen at company socials, preferring the quiet sanctity of the boardroom. His presence here now was an anomaly of seismic proportions. He stood by Aris's side with a protective stillness, his hand hovering near her elbow, not as an escort, but as a sentinel. To her left stood the rest of the board of directors. There was Evelyn Reed, the razor-sharp former CEO of a competing tech giant whom Damien had painstakingly courted to join his board. There was General Peterson, a retired 4-star general whose expertise in logistics was legendary. And there was Kenji Tanaka, the stoic head of a Japanese investment firm that held a significant stake in Apex. They were not smiling. They were not dressed for a party. They were dressed for a reckoning. Their faces were a uniform mask of grim, unassailable seriousness. The tableau was devastating in its implication. This was not a wife crashing a party. This was a strategic maneuver executed with chilling precision. This was a flanking attack. Damien stood frozen on the stage, his hand still holding Chloe's. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled pallor. His triumphant smile had collapsed into a slack-jawed rictus of disbelief. In a single silent moment, his entire world had tilted on its axis. The power, the control, the illusion of invincibility, it all evaporated under the calm, steady gaze of his pregnant wife. He looked from Aris to Marcus Blackwood, and a cold, primal fear, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, began to snake its way up his spine. Chloe, the so-called star of the future, seemed to shrink. The vibrant red of her dress now looked garish cheap. The adoration in her eyes was replaced by a dawning, panicked confusion. She was no longer the center of attention. She was a piece of collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known was being waged. Her hand slipped from Damien's slick with sweat. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint ambient music from the lobby, a stark contrast to the funereal stillness inside the ballroom. Then Aris took a single deliberate step forward. The soft click of her heel on the polished floor echoed like a gavel. She began to walk, not with the waddle of late-stage pregnancy, but with the measured, unhurried grace of someone in absolute command. Marcus Blackwood and the board of directors moved with her, a phalanx of power, clearing a path through the sea of petrified guests. They parted before her, like the Red Sea before Moses. The VPs, the city councilwoman, the tech blogger. They all shrank back, averting their eyes, suddenly desperate not to be associated with the man on the stage. Aris did not look at them. Her gaze was fixed laser-like on one person, and one person only, her husband. She was not there to confront the mistress. The mistress was a symptom, a footnote. Aris was there for the source of the disease. As she drew closer to the stage, the narrative of the evening was violently rewritten. The story was no longer about Damien's audacity. It was about Aris's arrival. And everyone in the room knew with a certainty that chilled them to the bone that this was not an ending. It was the beginning of the fall. The walk from the grand entrance to the foot of the low stage felt to Damien like the final agonizing mile of a marathon he hadn't known he was running. The air once filled with his own booming voice was now so thin he could barely draw a breath. Aris stopped directly in front of him. Her head tilted slightly as she looked up. The stage gave him a few feet of physical height, but he had never felt smaller, more exposed. He finally found his voice a strained, croaking sound that was a pathetic imitation of his usual confident tone. "Aris, what is this? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be resting." He glanced desperately towards Marcus Blackwood, searching for an ally, a familiar anchor in this surreal nightmare. "Marcus, what is the meaning of this? You're scaring the guests." Marcus Blackwood's stony expression did not soften. Instead, he took a step forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Aris, a human shield of immense authority. He ignored Damien's question entirely. His voice, when he spoke, was not the collegial tone of a chairman addressing his CEO, but something far colder, far more personal. "Are you all right, my dear?" he asked, his eyes full of genuine concern, directed only at Aris. Aris gave a small, reassuring nod. "I'm perfectly fine, Uncle Marcus. Thank you for asking." A collective, muted gasp rippled through the onlookers who were close enough to hear. Uncle Marcus. The revelation landed in the room like a second shockwave. Damien's mind reeled. He had known Aris had a godfather, a mysterious Uncle Marcus she spoke of fondly but rarely. A retired financier, she had said. Someone who managed her family's modest trust. He'd met the man once, years ago, a brief, forgettable handshake at a family gathering. He had never in a million years made the connection between that unassuming figure from Aris's past and the formidable Marcus Blackwood, the titan of industry he had worked so hard to impress the man who held the fate of his company in his hands. The board members had known, of course. They had always known. The knowledge cast their grim expressions in a new light. This wasn't just a corporate action, it was a personal matter. They weren't just backing a plan, they were backing a member of the family. Marcus turned his glacial gaze back to Damien. The thin veneer of civility was gone. "Westwood," he said, the name dropping like a shard of ice. "You seem to be under a number of misapprehensions. The first is that you have any say over where my goddaughter chooses to be. The second, and far more critical, is that your guests' comfort is our primary concern this evening." He gestured dismissively at the stunned crowd. "The party is over. On behalf of the board of directors of Apex Innovations, I'm asking all non-essential personnel to vacate the premises immediately. Thank you for your service. Your cars are waiting." There was a beat of stunned hesitation, then a frantic, hurried exodus. No one needed to be told twice. It was a stampede in slow motion, a desperate scramble for the exits. The clatter of dropped glasses and the rustle of expensive fabrics filled the air as the city's elite fled the scene of the corporate execution. They wanted no part of the shrapnel that was about to fly. Within 3 minutes, the cavernous ballroom was all but empty. All that remained was Damien and Chloe trapped on the stage and the silent, imposing tribunal that stood before them. Aris, her hand now resting proprietorially on her swollen belly, and the entire board of directors of Apex Innovations. The glittering decorations and half-empty champagne flutes suddenly looked pathetic, the remnants of a party that had died a violent death. Damien's fear was rapidly being replaced by a hot, defensive anger. The audacity. To be ambushed like this, humiliated in his own temple of success. "This is insane!" He finally spat out, his voice trembling with rage. "You can't do this! This is my company, my party!" He turned on Aris, his face contorted into a mask of righteous fury. "And you orchestrate this circus after everything I've given you. I told you to stay home." Aris's composure remained flawless. She looked at him not with the hurt of a betrayed wife, but with the detached pity of a doctor observing a patient in the throes of a terminal delusion. "You seem to be confused, Damien," she said, her voice calm and even, yet carrying an edge of pure, unadulterated steel. "You didn't give me anything. We were supposed to be partners, and you are mistaken about where home is. My home is where my family's interests lie." She patted her stomach gently. "And my home is with the legacy my father entrusted to Uncle Marcus to protect. A legacy that, as it turns out, includes a 12% founding stake in Apex Innovations held in a blind trust under my name. A fact you never bothered to investigate." Damien stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was a fish on the deck, gasping for air. A 12% stake. That made her the second largest individual shareholder. After him. He had always assumed her family's money was old, dusty, and irrelevant. He had never imagined it was woven into the very fabric of his own success. He finally turned his panicked gaze on Chloe, as if seeing her for the first time. She was no longer a symbol of his power, but a living, breathing testament to his monumental stupidity. She stood frozen, her face pale with terror, a scarlet stain of shame in a room suddenly devoid of all color. Aris followed his gaze, dismissing Chloe with a flick of her eyes. "Her Damien. This is what you were willing to risk it all for. A child playing dress-up. You didn't just underestimate me. You underestimated the entirety of your own life." Her words hung in the air, sharp and precise, dissecting his arrogance with surgical skill. The twist wasn't just that Marcus was her godfather. It was that Aris had never been the dependent wife he'd imagined. She had always been a silent, powerful partner, a stakeholder he had been too arrogant to see. And now she had come to call in her investment. The cavernous silence of the emptied ballroom was a physical weight. All the air and energy had been sucked out, leaving behind a vacuum, where every word, every subtle movement was amplified. Damien's rage, which had flared so hotly just moments before, now sputtered against the cold, unyielding wall of Aris's composure. He was a supernova, collapsing into a black hole. "A 12% stake," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. That's not possible. The paperwork. I vetted everything." "You vetted what I wanted you to see," Aris replied smoothly. "The trust was established by my father, long before I met you. It was designed to be discreet. You saw the name of the financial institution, not the beneficiary. You were so consumed with your own brilliance, it never occurred to you that my family might have had some of its own." She took a step closer to the stage, forcing him to look down at her. The power dynamic was absolute. You saw me as Dr. Aris Thorne, the academic, the quiet, supportive wife. You never bothered to look deeper. You never asked about the specifics of the modest trust that paid for my Stanford education outright, that allowed me to support us while you were coding in a garage, living on ramen and ambition. That seed money, Damien. Where did you think it came from? The sky. Each question was a surgical strike dismantling the myth of the self-made man he had so carefully constructed. He had rewritten their history, casting himself as the sole protagonist, the visionary who had pulled them both up from obscurity. Now Aris was restoring the erased text, revealing that she had not been a passenger on his journey. She had been the one who had paved the road. Damien's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route, but he was surrounded. The board stood like statues, their faces impassive, their judgment already past. He turned his fury on the only other target available. "Get out!" he snarled at Chloe, who flinched as if struck. "This has nothing to do with you. Get out!" Chloe looked from Damien's enraged face to Aris's cool, appraising one. She was a pawn in a game whose rules she was only just beginning to comprehend. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, tears welling in her eyes. She grabbed the sides of her crimson dress, turned and fled her heels, clicking a frantic, desperate rhythm on the marble floor until she disappeared through a side exit. A fleeting spectre of Damien's colossal misjudgment. He didn't even watch her go. His attention was solely on Aris. "So this is what it's about," he sneered, trying to regain some semblance of control to reframe the narrative. "Money. This is a shakedown. You find out you have some leverage, and you decide to stage this elaborate coup for what? A bigger settlement in the divorce." A faint, pitying smile touched Aris's lips. "Divorce. Oh, Damien. You're still thinking 3 moves behind. A divorce is a negotiation between equals. You and I are no longer equals." It was then that Marcus Blackwood spoke again, his voice a low rumble of authority. "Westwood, I suggest you stop talking. You are compounding your already catastrophic position." He glanced at Aris, a silent question in his eyes. She gave him a subtle nod. It was time. "You see, Damien," Aris continued, her tone shifting from personal confrontation to something colder, more clinical. "Your affair, your public humiliation of me, that was merely the catalyst. It was the insult that made me finally decide to look into the injury. I was hurt, yes, but mostly I was insulted that you thought I was so stupid I wouldn't notice." She began to pace slowly in front of the stage, her movements deliberate, her voice steady. "I started with the little things, the extravagant client gifts that never appeared on any official expense reports, the sudden inexplicable need for a holding company in the Cayman Islands. You always told me I didn't understand the complexities of your business, but I understand patterns, and I understand behavior, and your behavior, Damien, became erratic, desperate." Damien's face went rigid. This was moving beyond marital betrayal into a far more dangerous territory. "I didn't need to hire a private investigator to find out about Chloe," Aris said, waving a dismissive hand. "A child like that leaves a trail of digital breadcrumbs a mile wide. No, I saved my resources for something more important. I hired a team of forensic accountants, the best in the business, men and women who can find a single misplaced comma in a mountain of financial data." She stopped pacing and looked directly at him. Her eyes, which he had once found so beautiful, now looked like the barrels of a gun. What I found, Damien, was not just infidelity. It was a grand symphony of fraud. General Peterson, the logistics expert on the board, cleared his throat. Westwood, we have the preliminary report. It's extensive. Evelyn Reed, the former CEO, added in her sharp, no-nonsense tone. Project Nightingale, does that name mean anything to you? Damien froze. His blood ran cold. Project Nightingale was his secret, his albatross, his Hail Mary, a disastrously over-budget and perpetually failing side venture in experimental biotech, a company he had been siphoning millions from Apex Innovations to keep afloat, convinced it would be his true legacy. It was a financial black hole, and he had been illegally propping it up for 18 months. He thought his tracks were perfectly covered. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but the lie was flimsy transparent. The sweat beading on his forehead told the real story. Aris shook her head slowly. No more lies, Damien. It's over. We know everything. We know about the shell corporations. We know about the falsified invoices. We know about the kickbacks from suppliers. We know you've leveraged Apex's assets to secure personal loans for a failing company you illegally concealed from your own board and your shareholders. She paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle in the dead air of the room. You didn't bring your mistress to your office party to celebrate your success, Damien. You brought her here tonight because you were about to run. The final wire transfer for Project Nightingale was scheduled for tomorrow morning. You were going to drain the last of the accessible capital fly to a country with no extradition treaty, and leave the smoking crater of Apex Innovations behind for the rest of us to deal with. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, laced with a contempt that was more devastating than any shout. You weren't celebrating a new future. You were celebrating your escape. But you just couldn't resist one last arrogant flourish, could you? You had to rub my nose in it. And that Damien, she concluded, her eyes locking with his, was your fatal mistake. The name Project Nightingale hung in the air, an invisible, toxic cloud. For Damien, it was the sound of his own death knell. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly greyish sheen under the harsh ballroom lights. He stared at Aris not as his wife, but as a prosecutor who had just presented an irrefutable case-closing piece of evidence. The intricate web of lies he had spent years weaving had just been torn apart in a single devastating moment. How? The word was a choked whisper, a gasp for air in a collapsing reality. How could you possibly know? Aris's expression remained one of cool detachment, the look of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. You seem to forget, Damien, that before I was your wife, I was an economist specializing in behavioral modeling. I build predictive models based on patterns of human irrationality. And your defining characteristic, your fatal flaw, has always been your monumental ego. I simply built a model based on that. She gestured towards the impassive face of Michael Chen, the CFO, who had re-entered the room and now stood near the board, his face a mask of grim resolution. Michael and I have been speaking for weeks. Damien's head whipped towards his CFO, a man he had always considered loyal, if timid. Michael, you betrayed me. Michael Chen straightened his tie, his hands trembling slightly, but his voice, for the first time in Damien's memory, was firm. I have a fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. Mr. Westwood, my duty is not to you personally, especially not when your personal actions threaten to destroy everything we have built. Dr. Thorne approached me with some irregularities she had flagged. At first I was skeptical, but the patterns were undeniable. The numbers didn't lie. Aris picked up the narrative, her voice relentless. You thought Michael was a simple numbers man, a bean counter. You underestimated him just like you underestimated me. You assumed his fear of you was greater than his integrity. But when faced with the evidence of systematic grand-scale embezzlement, Michael made the correct choice. Marcus Blackwood stepped forward again, his presence commanding the space. He pulled a slim, leather-bound folder from inside his jacket. He didn't open it. The gesture alone was enough. The forensic accounting report is damning, Damien. Marcus stated, his voice devoid of emotion. We have digital copies of transfers between Apex accounts and the shell corporations funding Project Nightingale. We have sworn affidavits from 2 suppliers you pressured into the kickback scheme. They were more than happy to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Evelyn Reed, the sharp-eyed board member, added her piece. And we have Chloe Vance. Damien stared confused. Chloe? She knows nothing about my business. Oh, she knows more than you think, Evelyn said with a wry, mirthless smile. Or rather, she has more than you think. Young, ambitious women who get involved with powerful married men often have an insurance policy. In this case, it was a cloud backup of every single text message and email you ever sent her. Damien's mind raced frantically, trying to recall the specifics of his digital correspondence. The arrogant boasts, the casual mentions of a game-changing secret project that would make them royalty, the complaints about the board holding him back. It was all circumstantial, surely. That's nothing, he blustered, a cornered animal baring its teeth. Inane chatter. It proves nothing. It proves motive and mindset, Aris corrected him calmly. But you are right, it wasn't the smoking gun. The smoking gun, Damien, was something you gave her yourself. A little gift. Do you remember? She paused, letting him squirm in the silence. A few weeks ago, she continued, you gave her a new laptop, top of the line, a gift to your protégé to help with her work. What you didn't know is that our IT department, under Mr. Chen's instruction, had already flagged you as an internal security risk. Every new device connected to the Apex network, especially one given to a junior intern, for no discernible reason, is subject to a security sweep. On that laptop, Michael Chen added, his voice gaining strength, we found a hidden partitioned drive. On that drive was a single folder. Project Nightingale, Aris finished for him. The entire business plan, the fraudulent funding prospectus, the real catastrophic burn rate, and most importantly, your exit strategy, complete with details of a new identity and a one-way flight itinerary to Belize, booked for tomorrow afternoon. It was a checkmate so complete, so total, that Damien could do nothing but stare into the abyss that had just opened up beneath him. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn. His arrogance had been the key to his own prison. He had handed his executioners the axe, sharpened it for them, and then pointed to the spot on his own neck. The final crushing piece came not from Aris or the board, but from a source he had long forgotten. Kenji Tanaka, the silent Japanese investor, spoke for the first time, his English precise and accented. Mr. Westwood, he said, bowing his head slightly but keeping his eyes fixed on Damien. My firm invested in Apex Innovations because of the technology, but also because of the leadership. We were led to believe that leadership was a partnership between you and your wife, Dr. Thorne. Her family's historic involvement was a sign of stability. Your actions have not only been criminal, they have been a deep dishonor to that partnership. Tanaka looked at Aris. My firm and the investors I represent have lost all faith in your ability to lead. We have, however, gained immense respect for Dr. Thorne's diligence and integrity. We will be supporting the board's decision." The united front was absolute. There was no crack in their armor, no dissenting voice he could appeal to, no angle left to play. He had been so focused on the superficial battle with his wife, so absorbed in the thrill of his affair, that he had missed the real war being waged in the shadows. A war for the soul of his company. A war he had already lost. The weight of their collective judgment pressed down on Damien, a physical force that seemed to buckle his knees. The bespoke suit that had felt like armor now felt like a shroud. He looked at the faces before him. Aris serene and resolute. Marcus the embodiment of righteous authority. The board a jury that had already delivered its verdict. In their eyes, he saw no pity, no room for negotiation. He saw only the cold, hard finality of consequence. His mind, which had always moved at lightning speed, formulating strategies and contingency plans, was now a vortex of white noise. Belize. The flight. The new life he had planned a world away from the complexities of Apex and the impending reality of fatherhood. It had been so close a tangible dream. Now it was just smoke dissipating in the harsh glare of this impromptu tribunal. So what now? Damien finally asked the question hanging in the cavernous room. It was a plea, a desperate query from a king who had just been shown the guillotine. You call the SEC, the police, you drag the company's name, your own name, he added, looking at Aris through the mud. Is that what you want? It was a pathetic last-ditch attempt to find leverage, to suggest that his destruction would be mutually assured. Marcus Blackwood answered his tone, leaving no room for debate. There will be no public spectacle, Damien, not if it can be avoided. The reputation of Apex Innovations is paramount. We have a responsibility to our employees and our legitimate investors. A public scandal of this magnitude would be devastating for them. He took a single step forward, holding up a hand to forestall the flicker of hope in Damien's eyes. Do not mistake our discretion for weakness. Your options tonight are limited to 2. Both end with your complete and permanent removal from this company. He gestured to Eleanor Vance, the head of legal, who had been standing silently by, her expression unreadable. She stepped forward, placing a thin file folder and a pen on the edge of the stage. Option 1, Marcus continued, is the hard way. I make a phone call. In 10 minutes, detectives from the LAPD's white-collar crime division will walk through that door. They will arrest you. You will be tried for embezzlement, securities fraud, and a half-dozen other felonies. You will likely spend the next decade or more in a federal prison. Apex will issue a statement, denounce your actions, and cooperate fully with the prosecution. The company will survive, but it will be wounded. Your name will be a synonym for disgrace. Damien flinched. The word prison was a physical blow. Option 2, Marcus said, his voice dropping, is the clean way. Inside that folder is your full and immediate resignation as CEO and chairman of the board. It also contains a document transferring your entire shareholding in Apex Innovations, all 28% of it, into the trust controlled by Aris as restitution for the funds you embezzled. You will sign it. Tonight. Now. My shares, Damien choked out. That's everything. That's worth hundreds of millions. It's a fraction of what you were prepared to steal, and a pittance for the damage you have caused. Evelyn Reed cut in sharply. Consider it a bargain. If you sign, Marcus went on, you will be allowed to walk out of that door. We will release a statement tomorrow morning announcing your immediate retirement for personal health reasons. We will handle the fallout from Project Nightingale internally. The authorities will not be called. You will be left with nothing from this company, but you will have your freedom. You will be erased from the history of Apex, but you will not be in a jail cell." Damien looked from the folder to Aris. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't hatred. It was a profound, almost weary finality. This was her justice. Not vengeance, but a rebalancing of the scales. She wasn't just taking his company. She was taking back her life, her security, the future of their child, all of which he had gambled away. He knew it was no choice at all. A life of diminished status and wealth versus a life behind bars. His ego screamed in protest, but his survival instinct, the one true God he had always worshipped, took over. Slowly, shakily, he knelt down on the stage. His knees, clad in $1,000 wool, met the floor. It was the posture of a surrendering king. He reached for the pen. His hand trembled so violently he could barely grasp it. He uncapped it and opened the folder. The legalese swam before his eyes, but he knew what it said. It was the abdication of his entire world. With a shaking hand, he scrawled his signature, the signature that had launched $1 billion enterprise, on the line at the bottom. Then he did the same on the share transfer document. It was done. In 2 strokes of a pen, he had gone from Titan to pariah. He pushed the folder away from him as if it were radioactive. He stood up, his movements stiff, robotic. He was a ghost in his own ballroom. "It's done," he said, his voice hollow. Marcus Blackwood nodded crisply. "Eleanor, if you would secure the documents." Eleanor retrieved the folder with the tips of her fingers. "Damien," Marcus said, using his first name for the last time, "you have 60 seconds to leave the building. Your security detail has been dismissed. Your corporate accounts have been frozen. A taxi has been called for you. Do not return to the office. Do not return to the house. Any personal effects will be forwarded to an address of your choosing. Do not contact Dr. Thorne or any employee of this company again. Are we clear?" Damien gave a single jerky nod. He looked one last time at Aris, his wife, the mother of his child, the architect of his ruin. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came. What was there to say? He had sown the wind, and now he was reaping the whirlwind. He turned and walked off the stage, not towards the grand entrance, but towards the side exit Chloe had used. He didn't look back. The solitary figure of the fallen CEO disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind the empire he had built, and the woman he had fatally underestimated. As the door clicked shut behind him, Aris finally let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture of protection and promise. The room was quiet. The battle was over. The future was hers to write. In the quiet aftermath, standing in the wreckage of her husband's empire, Aris Thorne was not a victim seeking for solace, but a leader surveying her new domain. The board, her silent partners in this audacious gambit, unanimously voted to install her as the interim CEO of Apex Innovations. She was no longer the woman behind the man. She was the power, clear and undisputed. Her pregnancy was not an obstacle, but a deadline, a motivator to cleanse the company and build a stable, honorable legacy for the child she carried. Damien Westwood vanished into a self-imposed exile. A cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the dangers of hubris and underestimating the quiet ones. Aris, backed by her family's strength and her own formidable intellect didn't just survive the betrayal. She thrived on it, transforming the ashes of a broken marriage into the foundation of a new dynasty, proving that the best revenge isn't anger, but ascension. Thank you for joining us for this tale of drama and twisted justice. If you were on the edge of your seat, watching this millionaire's world come crashing down, don't forget to hit that like button. What did you think of Aris's masterful plan? Let us know in the comments below. For more stories of intricate plots, shocking betrayals, and satisfying revenge, make sure you click subscribe and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store for you. Share this video with someone who loves a good drama, and we'll see you in the next one.